Okay, so you sent us like a ton of articles about this whole millennial versus boomer thing.
Yeah.
Are we getting ready for like a super awkward Thanksgiving, or is this like a full-on family business takeover?
Uh-huh. Yeah, maybe a little bit of both, right?
It's kind of crazy how much this whole, generational feud thing is everywhere these days. But you also sent some like serious research too,
Yeah.
which makes me think maybe we're moving past just the, clickbait headlines and into some actual analysis.
Right, exactly. So today we're going to do a deep dive into this study from Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin.
Okay.
They're really trying to figure out if there's any real science behind all this, okay boomer versus avocado toast stuff.
Right.
But before we get into all that, I'm curious, what about you? What's your experience been with this whole generational divide thing?
Oh, yeah.
Is it just like playful teasing, or has it gotten a little too real?
Oh, man. I think we should hold that thought because this study actually gets into like why millennials and boomers might feel threatened by each other. Ooh. Okay. I'm ready. Let's unpack that.
So it all boils down to this idea called intergroup threat theory.
Okay.
Basically, it says we humans get all anxious when we think another group is a threat, right? But here's the thing, that threat can be to our resources, like, jobs and money, or to our values, like our beliefs about how society should work.
That's so interesting because it's not just like one generation, like literally taking stuff from the other.
Right.
It's also like this deeper fear that their whole worldview is like being messed with.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if like this whole intergroup threat theory thing pops up in other areas too, not just generations.
Oh, totally. I mean, we see that us versus them thing everywhere,
Yeah.
right? From politics to religion to even like sports.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, this research could have implications way beyond just millennials and boomers.
I like where you're going with this, but for now, let's stick with the generations.
Okay.
This study found that those different types of threats, the resources versus values thing,
Yes.
play out in a super interesting way between millennials and boomers.
Uh-huh.
Now, I think most people would assume millennials have the upper hand these days, but
Yeah.
the research actually says that boomers are still like the dominant group in the U.S.
Interesting.
They have more wealth, more political power, which kind of challenges that stereotype of older adults being, frail and out of touch.
Yeah, it really flips the script.
Totally. And that power dynamic plays a huge role in like what each generation sees as a threat.
Right.
And here's the really interesting part. Contrary to what you might think,
Okay.
boomers aren't actually that worried about millennials taking their jobs or money.
Huh.
So it's not about like economic competition.
Not really. No, their bigger concern is what the researchers call symbolic threats.
Okay, so not like tangible losses, but more a feeling that like the culture they knew is changing in ways they don't like.
Exactly. They're worried that millennials are like eroding those traditional American values that they hold dear. And this was even stronger among white boomers, the research says.
Wow, okay, so boomers are feeling symbolically threatened. But isn't it possible that at least some boomers are also worried about like economic stuff too?
Uh-huh.
Like healthcare costs or Social Security. I mean, those things affect everyone, regardless of generation.
Right. That's a good point, for sure. While this study focused on, these specific types of threats,
Yeah,
it's definitely not like a black and white thing.
right.
It's totally possible that some boomers feel a mix of both symbolic and like realistic economic threats.
Right.
I mean, people are complex. Their concerns don't always fit neatly into categories.
Totally. And to be fair, millennials aren't just, sipping lattes and watching the world burn either.
Uh-huh. No, not at all. This study suggests that millennials are very focused on those realistic threats,
Yeah.
like we were talking about. They see boomers holding on to power and influence, and they feel like it makes it harder for them to get ahead financially.
Yeah, and millennials have faced some serious economic challenges. Student loan debt, crazy high housing costs, a global pandemic.
For sure.
I could go on.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is that the research didn't just ask people their opinions. They looked at policy support across generations, too.
So we're not just talking about like feelings here. This is affecting actual politics too.
Exactly. Millennials were way more likely to support things like student loan forgiveness, policies that would directly help younger people.
Right.
While boomers were more in favor of policies geared towards older adults. It shows how these generational differences aren't just like theoretical, they're actually shaping the political landscape.
Okay, so it sounds like we've got like a standoff here.
Yeah.
Boomers worried about a changing culture. Millennials worried about their bank accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any hope for peace between these like warring generations?
Well, the researchers actually found something kind of hopeful.
Right.
They found a way to maybe like dial down the animosity.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And it all has to do with how we see these groups in the first place.
Okay, tell me more.
There's this term entitativity, which basically means how much we see a group as one big blob. You know, like all millennials act this way, all boomers think that way.
Right.
The study found that when they challenged that, that rigid categorization,
Yeah.
when they blurred the lines a bit, people felt less threatened.
So instead of us versus them, it's more like, hey, we're all just people on this crazy ride called life.
Exactly.
I like that. But
Yeah.
how do they actually get people to see it that way?
They just emphasize that aging is a continuous process we all go through.
Right.
We're all young. Once we'll all be old someday. It's not like we're different species or something.
Yeah?
This subtle shift in thinking seemed to make a real difference.
That's a pretty powerful takeaway. Instead of like boxing ourselves into these generational categories,
Yeah,
maybe we can focus more on like our shared experiences.
exactly. And it makes you wonder if we can use this same approach to challenge other stereotypes and biases too. What stands out to you about all this?
I've definitely seen that symbolic threat thing play out in my own family.
Oh, yeah.
My uncle gets so worked up about anything he sees as a threat to traditional values, even if it doesn't really affect him personally.
Wow.
It's almost like he feels like his whole identity is under attack.
It's a powerful reminder that these aren't just like abstract academic concepts. They're playing out in living rooms and at dinner tables all over the place. It really makes you think about what happens when we add more layers to this whole generational thing.
Like, what else are we missing here?
Well, we've talked about economic threats and values, but what about those big looming threats that affect everyone, like climate change?
Oh, you're right. We haven't really talked about that.
Yeah, climate change is something that's going to impact all of us no matter when we were born. It's not a generational issue, it's a human issue.
Exactly. And there's more and more research showing that younger generations are much more concerned about climate change
Right.
and more likely to support policies to address it.
Which makes sense. They're the ones who are going to have to live with the consequences the longest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I can see how that could lead to a whole new kind of tension.
Uh-huh.
You've got millennials and Gen Z feeling like boomers haven't done enough to protect the planet, and some boomers might resist changes that disrupt their lifestyles.
It's a recipe for some heated disagreements, for sure. And we're already seeing this play out in politics,
Oh, yeah.
Young activists demanding bolder action on climate, while some older politicians seem more resistant to change. It's like that saying, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
So maybe this whole generational warfare thing is just getting started.
It's possible, but I also think there's a potential silver lining here if we can recognize these emerging threats and how they might divide us.
Yeah.
Maybe we can also find some common ground.
Yeah, maybe instead of fighting each other, we can work together to find solutions. Humans versus climate change.
Exactly. Climate change doesn't care what generation you're from. It's in everyone's best interest to come together and figure this out.
Okay, that's a much more hopeful way to look at it.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the research did find real differences in how generations see the world.
Yeah.
It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
You're right. It's not about pretending like those differences aren't there. It's about understanding why those differences exist.
Exactly.
And then using that, knowledge to bridge the gap.
Totally acknowledging those different perspectives can help us move forward, in a more constructive way.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap.
Okay.
We started with this whole millennials versus boomers thing.
Yeah.
Explored some really fascinating research that took us beyond the stereotypes.
Uh-huh.
And now we're talking about the fate of the planet.
Wow.
Not bad for one deep dive.
Uh-huh. It's amazing how these simple labels, millennial, boomer,
Right.
can lead to such complex conversations about social dynamics, economic anxieties, and even the environment.
It really makes you think twice about those dismissive headlines and kids these days rants.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So as we wrap up here, what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
That's a good question.
What's that nugget of wisdom they can take with them
Yeah.
into their next family gathering or water cooler debate?
I think it's the next time you're about to say, okay, boomer, or roll your eyes at another millennial think piece, just take a second and remember that you're not dealing with a caricature. You're interacting with a real person who has their own experiences and anxieties and hopes for the future.
It's a good reminder that we're all products of our time, right?
Yeah.
We're all shaped by the events and the culture, that was happening when we were growing up.
Absolutely.
Understanding that context is key.
Totally. And if we can all try to approach each other with a little more empathy and understanding,
Yeah.
we might be surprised at how much common ground we can find.
I love that. And hey, if we can like turn down the volume on this whole generational warfare thing,
Right.
maybe we can actually focus on tackling those big scary problems we were talking about.
Yep.
You know, the ones that threaten all of us, no matter what generation we belong to.
That's the hope, right? To move past these divisions and recognize that we're all in this together.
Couldn't agree more. So there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into the world of millennials and boomers. I hope you learned something new today, or at least had a few laughs along the way.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep challenging those assumptions.
And remember, age is just a number,
Right.
except when it comes to wine and cheese. Those definitely get better with time. See you next time.